Rancher saved a stranger in a blizzard, not knowing she ruled the largest ranch in the territory. The storm should have killed her. That was the first thing Luke Callahan thought when he saw the shape in the snow. At first he almost rode past it. The blizzard had turned the whole Montana mountain into one endless wall of white. Wind tore across the ridge like something alive. Snow struck his face so hard it felt like sand and needles at once. His horse, Bess, had her head low and her ears flat, fighting every step. Luke had been out too long already, checking on scattered cattle that should have been closer to the lower pasture. He had found 3 calves frozen stiff, 1 yearling buried nose-deep in drifted snow, and not much else but loss. He was turning for home when Bess stopped so hard it nearly threw him from the saddle. "What is it, girl?" She snorted and danced sideways, her eyes wide. Luke narrowed his eyes through the storm. At first all he saw was black shape and broken wood. Then the wind shifted. A carriage. A fancy one too, painted dark, trimmed in brass. The kind meant for smooth roads and wealthy people, not mountain trails in the middle of winter. It was lying on its side, half buried already. One wheel had snapped clean off. A dead horse lay beside it with its legs stiff in the air. A trunk had burst open and spilled silk dresses and velvet cloth into the snow, where they whipped and froze like torn flags. Luke swore under his breath and slid down from the saddle. No driver, no guard. No body except the dead horse. Then he saw the marks, dragged fingers, scraped cloth, a trail leading away from the wreck. Someone had crawled. He followed it with the wind shoving at his back and snow filling his boots. 20 feet, 30. Then he found her. She was curled against a drift like she had tried to dig her way into the snow for shelter. Her coat was torn open. Her dark hair was crusted white. One hand was bare. Snow had already piled across her shoulders and half over her face. Luke dropped to his knees. For one terrible second he thought he was too late. He turned her over and felt the cold punch through him. She was young. Not a girl, but not much older than 25. Her face was pale blue from the cold. Her lashes were frozen together. Her lips were cracked and colorless. She looked too fine for this place, too clean-boned, too carefully dressed even under the ruined coat. She looked like someone who belonged in a big house near a fire, not thrown into the teeth of a mountain storm. Luke pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Nothing. Then again, there, a weak flutter, barely life but life. "Come on," he muttered, leaning close as if force of will could drag her back. "You're not dying today." He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her at once. The wind hit him like a blade the second he did, but he ignored it. Cold could wait. Death would not. Getting her onto Bess was ugly work. The horse hated the smell of blood and fear from the wreck. She kept sidestepping in the snow, trying to pull away. Luke spoke low and firm, one hand on the reins, one arm around the woman's frozen body. "It's all right. Easy, easy now." At last Bess steadied just enough. Luke dragged the woman across the saddle, climbed up behind her and pulled her tight against his chest. She was so cold he could feel it through his shirt, not just chilled, deadly cold, the kind that stole a person slow and quiet. He turned Bess toward home. The ride back felt twice as long as it should have. Luke could barely see. Snow tore at his face and lodged in his beard. The woman's head kept dropping against his shoulder, and every time it did, fear rose in his throat. He kept one arm locked around her and one hand on the reins. He leaned low over Bess's neck and prayed harder than he had in years. When the shape of his cabin finally appeared through the white, it looked less like a building and more like mercy. He kicked the door open and nearly fell inside with her in his arms. The sudden quiet made his ears ring. He laid her on the buffalo rug in front of the hearth and went straight to the fire. His hands shook so hard he nearly dropped the kindling. He got a flame going, then another, feeding it until the room filled with heat and smoke and life. Then he turned back to her. She had not moved. Her boots were frozen hard. Her stockings were soaked. Her fingers had gone white at the tips. Luke knew what cold like that could do. He had seen frostbite take toes, fingers, ears. He had seen men lose whole hands because they waited too long. He knelt beside her and got to work. There was no room for shame in a storm like this. Only time, only choices. He pulled off her boots first, then peeled away wet layers one by one, keeping his eyes on his hands and moving as fast as he could. Her clothes told him what the carriage already had: fine wool, silk, tailoring too good for any ordinary traveler. Whoever she was, she came from money, or power, maybe both. None of that mattered if she froze on his floor. He wrapped her in every wool blanket he had. He got whiskey into a cup, lifted her carefully, and forced a little between her lips. Most dribbled back out. Some went down. He melted snow. He rubbed warmth back into her hands and feet in slow, painful circles. He changed water, fed the fire, rubbed her fingers again, waited, started over. Hours passed. Outside, the blizzard tried to tear the cabin off the hill. Inside, the fire held. Luke sat in his single chair when at last there was nothing more to do but watch and wait. He held a cup of coffee gone cold in both hands and kept his eyes on her face. She breathed in soft, shallow pulls, too weak but steady. Near dusk, her eyelids twitched. Luke set the cup down. She gasped and jerked upright so fast the blanket slid off one shoulder. "Easy," Luke said at once. "You're safe." Her eyes were wild for a second, confused, searching. She looked at the log walls, the small room, the rifle hanging over the mantel, then at him. Her hand flew to the blankets and pulled them tight against herself. "Where am I?" "My cabin, north of Bozeman." Memory hit her face all at once. The carriage. What? Luke nodded once, found it broken in the pass. Her throat moved, and the men. No sign of them. That answer did not calm her. He could see it plainly. Fear stayed in her face, just changing shape. Not panic now, calculation. She was measuring him, the room, the door, the window, the distance between herself and anything that could be used as a weapon. Luke understood that kind of look. "You hungry?" he asked. She blinked, almost as if the question surprised her. Then she gave the smallest nod. He handed her hot broth in a tin cup. Her hands shook so badly she nearly spilled it. The blistered tips of her fingers looked angry and raw now that warmth had come back into them. "Drink slow." She obeyed. After a minute he asked, "You got a name?" What? She hesitated just a breath too long. "Anna," she said. It was a lie. Luke heard it as clearly as if she had shouted it. Still, he only nodded. "Luke." She drank another sip. "I cannot pay you for this." Luke looked away, jaw hardening a little. Wasn't asking for pay. That seemed to shame her for reasons he did not understand. The room grew quiet again. Outside, the storm howled against the walls and roof. Snow rattled against the window. Inside, the fire painted everything gold and red. The woman on his bunk looked too refined for the rough blanket around her shoulders and the tin cup in her hands. But there was something else there too, something under the polish. Fear, yes. Exhaustion, yes, but not weakness. "What happened?" Luke asked. She stared into the broth. "The road gave way." Another lie, not a full one maybe, but not the truth. Luke leaned back in the chair and let it pass. A person fresh from death got to keep her secrets for one night. "Storms got us buried for days," he said. "You can rest." Her eyes rose to his. "Why would you help me?" Luke almost laughed, though there was no humor in him. "Because you were freezing to death in my snow." That answer seemed to catch her off guard too. She looked away first. Night settled hard around the cabin. Luke put another log on the fire and laid his bedroll near the door. She frowned when she saw it. "What are you doing?" "Sleeping." She glanced toward the bunk beneath her. "This is yours." "You're sick." "I can sleep on the floor." "No." It came out sharper than he meant. He softened his tone a little. "Take the bunk." For a moment it looked like she might argue. Then she sank back under the blankets, too tired to fight. Luke lay on the floor with one hand near the rifle and stared at the low ceiling while the wind screamed outside. He did not know why this woman had lied about her name. He did not know who had been with her in that carriage or where they had gone. He only knew one thing for certain. Whoever she really was, trouble had ridden into the blizzard with her. Sometime after midnight, her voice pulled him awake. Soft, broken, fever-thin, he lifted his head. She was twisting in the bunk, trapped in some dream. "No," she whispered. "No, please, Langley, they took it. They took the ranch." Luke was on his feet before he thought about it. He reached her just as she jerked awake with a frightened cry. "It's all right," he said, catching her shoulders before she fell from the bunk. "You're dreaming." Her breath came fast and wild. For 1 second she fought him without knowing she was doing it. Then her eyes focused. She saw his face, saw the fire, saw the cabin. Slowly the panic eased, her whole body shook. Without thinking, she leaned forward and rested against him. Luke froze. She was warm now, but fragile in a way the cold had hidden before. Her forehead pressed to his chest. Her breath moved through his shirt. One of her hands clutched the blanket at her throat like she was still half afraid he might disappear if she let go. Luke let one careful hand settle between her shoulders. "It was a dream," he said quietly. But the name stayed with him. Langley. That was no small name in Montana. The Langley Ranch was the biggest spread in the territory, bigger than some towns, richer than most banks. Luke stared into the fire over her shoulder, the pieces sliding together in his head. A fancy carriage, guarded travel, a lie about her name, men chasing her, a fever dream about a ranch. The stranger in his bunk was no ordinary woman. And if Luke Callahan was right, he had just pulled one of the most powerful women in Montana out of a blizzard without having the slightest idea what kind of war was coming to his door. Morning came gray and cold, but the storm had not moved on. It still pressed against the cabin like it had business there. Luke Callahan rose before dawn out of habit. He stirred the fire back to life, set coffee on the stove, and checked the door brace. Snow had drifted halfway up the outside wall. If the blizzard kept piling on like this, he might need to dig them out before he could even reach the barn. When he turned, the woman was already awake. She sat upright on the bunk with the blankets wrapped tightly around her. The fever flush from the night before was gone. In its place was something sharper. Her eyes followed him in a way that told him she was thinking clearly now, watching, measuring. She had the look of someone who had spent a long time learning what could hurt her and how fast. Luke handed her a tin cup of coffee. She took it carefully. "Thank you." He nodded and busied himself by the stove, though the truth was he kept noticing little things about her whether he wanted to or not. The way she held the cup with both hands because her fingers were still sore. The way her back stayed straight even wrapped in blankets. The way she seemed too used to giving orders and too tired to pretend otherwise. "Where exactly are we?" she asked. "About 40 miles north of Bozeman." Her eyes lowered to the fire. "Storm's got the pass closed," he went on. "No one's going anywhere soon." That landed hard. He saw it in the tight set of her jaw. She was not only trapped by weather. By midday, the silence between them had worn thin enough for truth to start pushing through it. She sat near the fire with a needle and thread he had found in an old tin box. One sleeve of her dress had torn in the wreck, and she was repairing it with neat, tiny stitches. Luke sharpened his skinning knife at the table, the scraping sound steady in the quiet room. At last she said, "I was traveling to Bozeman." Luke looked up, alone. "No." She kept sewing, but her hand slowed. "I had a driver and a guard." Luke waited. She swallowed once. "3 men stopped us on the trail. They came out of the trees. One shot my driver before he could even turn the team. My guard fired back, but they pushed the carriage off the road." The image came to him clear and ugly. Men with guns, horses screaming, wheels breaking against rock, cold rushing in where life used to be. "You ran," he said. Her needle paused. "I don't remember much after that." "You ran," he repeated. She looked up then, and for the first time since he had brought her inside, she did not seem to be choosing her words as carefully. "That is why you're alive." Something in her face changed at that. Not relief, not exactly, more like surprise, as if she had been waiting for judgment and found none. That made her talk more, not all at once, not cleanly, but enough. Her father had died 2 months earlier. There had been land, a lot of land, a foreman named Morgan, and a fight over who now owned what. She never said the name of the ranch, but she did not need to. Luke had already heard enough. He knew men like Morgan. Men who smiled in front of your father and stole from you before the dirt settled over his grave. "You told him no," Luke said. Her fingers tightened on the cloth in her lap. "Yes." And now he wants your answer changed." She nodded. The room went quiet again. Luke stood and walked to the window. There was nothing to see but white and the ghost shape of the shed through blowing snow, but his mind was already moving past the storm. If Morgan had sent men after her once, he would do it again. Men like that did not leave loose ends breathing. Behind him, she asked quietly, "Do you always live like this?" Luke glanced back. In a cabin no bigger than a horse stall, 40 miles from town, talking only when you must. The question held no insult, only curiosity. He leaned one shoulder against the wall. "Mostly." "Why?" He almost said, "Because the mountains are honest." Instead he answered with the truth. "Less people, less trouble." Her mouth tilted very slightly. "And yet trouble still found you." That earned the faintest breath of a laugh from him. By evening the storm had eased just enough to trade fury for warning. The wind no longer slammed the walls. Now it hissed over the roof and moaned through the drifts. The cabin felt smaller than before, not because the room had changed, but because they had. They were no longer only a rancher and a stranger. They were two people holding pieces of the same fear. Luke sat by the fire with his knife in his lap. She sat across from him on the bunk, mending another tear in her coat. Firelight moved over her face in soft gold and shadow. Without the frozen terror from the night before, he could see she was not only beautiful, she was strong in a quiet way. The kind that kept going after too much had already been lost. Then she said something that made him sit straighter. "My father left me his ranch." Luke did not answer right away. She kept her eyes on the torn coat. "Morgan said the land should be his. He said my father had promised it. There are no papers, only his word." "And yours?" Her laugh this time held no warmth at all. "A dead man's daughter against a foreman who has worked the land 20 years. Most men believed him, or pretended to." Luke looked at the scarred knuckles of his own hands. "You were heading for the territorial marshal." "Yes." "To make it public." "Yes." That made sense. A woman with a claim that big could not disappear quietly, not unless someone wanted her gone badly enough. The thought sat between them until the next morning. That was when the wolves came. Luke heard them before dawn, a long, rising howl, then another. He was at the door with his rifle before she even stood up. Her face went pale. "What is that?" "Wolves." Her eyes flashed toward the little back window, the shed, the mule pen beyond it. "They'll go for the mule," Luke said. "If I lose him, we're trapped here even after the snow softens." She threw the blanket aside and reached for her boots. "I'm coming." "No." His answer came fast and final. She stared at him. "You stay inside. Don't open this door unless you hear my voice." "Not for anything else." "There are too many." "Then that's one more reason for you to stay here." Before she could argue again, he stepped out into the blue-white morning and shut the door behind him. The cold hit like a wall. Snow creaked under his boots as he moved toward the shed. The mule was already kicking and screaming inside, smelling death in the air. Shadows moved low and fast beyond the drift line. One wolf lunged first. Luke fired and dropped it in the snow. The others scattered, then circled wider. He could hear them now. Growls, breath, movement through powder. Smart animals. Hungry animals. The second came from his left. He swung the rifle too late. It hit him high and hard, knocking him off balance. They went down together in the snow. Teeth closed on his left arm just below the shoulder. Pain ripped through him hot and bright. He drove the butt of the rifle into the wolf's skull once, twice, until it let go and rolled away snarling. Another rushed in. Luke fired from the ground and the shot echoed off the buried trees. Then silence. For 3 terrible seconds there was nothing but his own breathing. The surviving wolves melted back into the white. Luke staggered to his feet. Blood ran hot down his sleeve, steaming in the cold. He made it to the cabin door by force more than balance. "Victoria," he gasped before he even thought about what name he used. "Open it." The bar lifted at once. She pulled the door wide and froze when she saw the blood. "Luke." He stumbled inside and hit one knee before she caught him under the good arm. "It's nothing," he muttered. She gave him a hard look sharp enough to cut leather. "That is not nothing." She got him into the chair by the fire. Her hands moved quickly now, not like a frightened woman from a broken carriage, but like someone raised in a big house where wounds still had to be cleaned and men still bled the same as anyone else. She cut the sleeve away, and when she saw the torn flesh beneath, her face tightened. "Whiskey," he said. She had already grabbed it. The liquor hit the wound and Luke hissed through his teeth, the muscles in his jaw jumping. She did not flinch. She cleaned it, pressed cloth to stop the bleeding, then wound a bandage tight around his arm with more steadiness than he could have managed himself. "You got the mule?" she asked quietly. Luke gave the faintest nod. "Still got him." Only then did she let herself breathe. The cabin had gone still around them, fire snapping, wind low against the wall. Her hands tied the final knot in the bandage, and when she looked up, her face was very close to his, too close for strangers. His good hand covered hers without either of them planning it. She froze, so did he. The warmth of her skin startled him more than the wound. For one long moment they did not move. Then he let go and looked away first. "It'll heal," he said roughly. She stood, but not before he saw the color rise in her cheeks. That night neither of them slept much. The storm was gone, but something else had changed. Near midnight, Luke woke and found her standing by the frosted window in her blanket, staring out at the moonlit snow. "You're supposed to be resting," he said. She turned. Firelight caught her face, and the look in her eyes was quieter than fear. "I don't think I've been safe for a very long time." Luke sat up on his bedroll. He had no easy answer for that, no good promise either, so he told the truth. "You are tonight." She crossed the room slowly. When she passed him, her hand brushed his good shoulder, only for a second, but it was enough. By the next afternoon, the snow had hardened enough for Luke to check the ridge trail. He left for less than an hour. When he returned, he was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He dropped a frozen leather tag onto the table. She picked it up. The blood drained from her face. The name carved into it was simple. Morgan. Her whole body went still. "Who are you really?" Luke asked quietly. She sat down as if her knees no longer trusted her. When she spoke, her voice sounded stripped bare. "My name is Victoria Langley." The room seemed to lose its air. Luke had guessed she was important. He had not guessed this. Everyone in Montana knew the Langley name. The Langley Ranch was not just land, it was power. It fed towns, hired men by the hundreds, controlled water, stock, trails, and money. Her father had built something so big most men spoke of it the way they spoke of weather. Always there. "Bigger than you." Victoria's hands shook around the leather tag. "Silas Morgan was my father's foreman," she said. "After my father died, he claimed the ranch had been promised to him. He said I had no head for land, that I should sign it over and be grateful. When I refused, he sent those men after me." Luke's jaw hardened. "He killed your driver and guard." She nodded once. Then she looked at him with a fear that was no longer hidden. "They know I'm alive now." Luke moved to the door and looked out into the snow. Tracks in the distance. Men had come close, close enough to leave a marker, close enough to let them know this was no accident. He shut the door again. "They'll be here by dark." Victoria stood so fast the chair scraped. "Can we run?" Luke looked at the snowdrifts outside, the bleeding light, the wound in his arm, then back at her. "No." The word landed like a blow. For a second she looked almost as frozen as when he found her. Then Luke crossed to the shelf, took down the heavy revolver and placed it in her hands. Her fingers trembled around the grip. He met her eyes. "Then we make a stand." Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The last light of day faded fast behind the snow. Inside Luke Callahan's cabin, the air had changed. It no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a battlefield waiting for the first shot. Victoria Langley stood near the table with the heavy revolver in both hands. Her fingers still trembled, but not the way they had before. This was not the trembling of cold or fear alone. It was the trembling of a woman who finally knew the last lie had burned away. Luke knew her name now. He knew the kind of men coming for her. and by nightfall, those men would know exactly where she had taken shelter. Luke moved through the cabin with the hard calm of a man who had run out of time for doubt. He nailed a board over the back window, leaving only a narrow gap to shoot through. He dragged the table across the front wall for cover. He loaded every rifle and counted every cartridge twice. Victoria watched him for a moment before she found her own work. "Tell me what to do." Luke looked at her. "You ever fired one of those?" "A little. My father made me learn when I was 16. That enough to hit a man?" She swallowed once. "If I have to. That's all I need." He showed her where to stand if the front window gave way, how to breathe before pulling the trigger, how to keep low if bullets started cutting through the walls. She listened without interrupting, every part of her focused now. The fear had not left her. It had simply turned into something harder. By the time darkness settled outside, the cabin was ready as it could be. Then the voices came. At first only one, then two, then more. Men moved beyond the drift line, hidden in the blue-black shadows of snow and pine. Horses stamped and snorted somewhere beyond sight. Luke crouched at the shooting gap by the front wall and kept the rifle steady. Victoria knelt near the hearth where he had told her to wait, the revolver braced in both hands. A voice rose from outside, smooth and ugly. "This is Callahan's place." Luke's jaw tightened. Then came the voice Victoria knew too well. "Victoria," Morgan called, "we know you're in there." She went stiff. Luke did not look back at her, but he felt the room change around that name. Morgan took another step closer. His boots crunched through crusted snow. "You've made enough trouble, girl. Come out and I'll be kind." Victoria's face went white with rage. Luke finally glanced back at her. "Stay low." The next seconds moved fast. A shadow broke from the trees on the right side of the cabin, trying to rush the wall unseen. Luke fired once. A cry split the night and the shadow dropped hard into the snow. Gunfire exploded from the ridge. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, driving splinters across the room. One tore through the shelf above the stove and shattered a jar of beans. Another hit the doorframe so close to Luke's head that dust rained down into his hair. Victoria flinched but did not scream. "Window," Luke snapped. She turned and aimed toward the narrow shooting gap he had left on the side wall. A dark shape moved there. She fired. The blast nearly threw the revolver from her hand, but the shadow outside fell away at once. Luke looked back sharply. She had hit him. Morgan shouted from outside, all smoothness gone now. "Break the door." A heavy thud slammed against the cabin. Then another, an axe. Luke moved fast. He crossed the room in 2 strides, shoved the table harder against the wall, then crouched beside the door and listened. The blade bit into the wood again, deeper this time. Victoria's breath came fast. "Luke, stay where you are." Another chop. Another. The bar across the door shook. Luke stepped back, raised the rifle, and waited. The next axe blow split through the panel. He saw an arm, a shoulder, a man pushing hard to break in. Luke yanked the bar loose, ripped the door open with his good arm, and fired point-blank. The man flew backward into the snow, the axe spinning from his hands. Luke slammed the door shut again and dropped the bar back into place. His face had gone pale from pain. The wolf wound in his arm had torn open under the strain. Blood spread dark across the bandage and down his sleeve. "Luke, you're bleeding." "Not dying yet." Outside, the firing stopped. That silence was worse than the gunshots. Morgan's voice came again, farther back now. "Callahan, you think you can hold all night?" Luke said nothing. Morgan laughed once. "Maybe, but cabins burn." Victoria's eyes widened. Luke moved to the back wall and listened. No footsteps near the rear, not yet. If Morgan meant to set the place on fire, he would need to get close enough to throw flame against the logs or the roof. For 10 long minutes, nothing happened. Then the hoofbeats came, not charging, retreating. Luke stayed by the wall, listening until the sound faded fully into the dark. Only then did he lower the rifle. "They're gone," he said. Victoria let out the breath she had been holding and dropped to sit on the floor where she stood. Her whole body shook now that the worst of it had passed. Then she saw his arm again. The bandage was soaked through. She crossed the room to him at once. "Sit down." Luke started to argue. She gave him a look so sharp it could have cut wire. "Now." That settled it. He sat by the fire while she brought whiskey, clean cloth, and the little sewing kit from the shelf. Her hands no longer shook. That surprised them both. She cut the bandage away and hissed softly at the torn flesh beneath. "You ripped it open." "Had to." She poured whiskey over the wound. Luke's whole body tightened, but he made no sound beyond one rough breath through his teeth. "You are the most stubborn man I have ever met." He looked up at her. "You know many." Her mouth almost lifted, enough to know the type. She cleaned the wound, then threaded the needle. Luke stared at the fire. "You ever done this before?" "No." That made him turn. She met his eyes calmly. "You saved me in that storm. I can do this." And she did. Each stitch was careful, not fast but steady. She wiped blood from his skin, tied off the thread, then wrapped the wound again with clean cloth. When she finished, her hands were stained red. She looked down at them for a moment. Then she whispered, "You saved my life." Luke's voice came low. "And you saved mine." Something in the room shifted then, not with surprise, with certainty. She was kneeling between his knees, close enough that he could see every line of fear and strength still left in her face. The firelight moved over her hair and caught the wetness gathered in her eyes. He lifted one rough hand and brushed a streak of soot from her cheek. Her breath caught. Neither of them moved back. The kiss came like something already decided between them. It was not careful. It was not slow. It was born from fear and relief, and the wild knowledge that both of them had nearly died more than once in the last 2 days. Victoria's hands caught in the front of his shirt. Luke's good arm came around her waist and held her like the only safe thing left in the world was right there in front of him. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Victoria rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she whispered. Luke closed his eyes for 1 second. "Morning," he said. "Morning happens." But morning brought no mercy. At first light, Luke checked the ridge through the shooting gap and came back from the wall looking worse than before. Not only from blood loss, from what he had seen. "They're coming back." Victoria stood at once. "How many?" "More." Her face lost its color again. "What do we do?" Luke already knew the answer. He hated it, but he knew it. "We go to your ranch." She stared at him. "My ranch?" "It's the only place nearby with walls thick enough to hold men off. Your father's house was built like a fort. I've seen it from the South Ridge." Her lips parted. "Morgan is there." "I know." She looked toward the door as if she could already see the place. Her home, her father's land, now occupied by the very man trying to erase her. "It's still better than dying here." That ended it. They packed fast. Cartridges, food, blankets, whiskey, 2 rifles, the revolver. Luke nearly fell while saddling Bess one-handed, and Victoria caught him under the elbow before he hit the snow. "You can barely stand." "I can ride." He could, barely. They left through the rear of the cabin and took the narrow deer trail that cut behind the ridge. Snow still lay deep and cruel over everything. Luke rode in front as long as he could, but fever had begun creeping into him from the torn wolf bite. By midday his shoulders sagged in the saddle, and Victoria had to keep calling his name to pull him back from the fog. "Stay awake." "I am awake." "You were asleep with your eyes open." That drew the faintest grunt from him. It was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard all day. By dusk they saw the ranch. Even half buried in winter, Langley Ranch looked powerful. Long fences disappearing into snow. Main house rising from the land like it owned the valley. Smoke from the chimney. Light in the lower windows. Victoria's throat tightened. "That was my home." Luke looked at her once, then take it back. He led her to an old line shack near the edge of the property and dismounted badly, using the wall to stay upright. He handed her one rifle. "You stay here till I call." "No." He turned sharply. "Victoria." "I said no." There was steel in her voice, now stronger than any he had heard from her in the cabin. "That house is mine. That land is mine. I'm done hiding while other people bleed for me." Before he could stop her, she stepped out from the lined shack and started toward the main house. Snow crunched under her boots. Morgan opened the front door before she reached the steps. He had likely seen them from the upper window already. He smiled when he saw her. "Well," he said, spreading his hands as if greeting a guest. "Look what the storm dragged back." Victoria stopped in the yard and lifted her chin. "I am Victoria Langley," she said, her voice carrying across the frozen yard. "You are trespassing on my land." Morgan laughed. "Girl, you never had the nerve for this place." A new voice cut through the air before she could answer. "Yes," Luke rasped from the shadows, "she does." He stepped out beside the barn, barely steady on his feet but with a knife in one hand and murder in his eyes. Morgan spun and drew. The shot cracked. Luke jerked and fell into the snow. Victoria screamed. Morgan swung the pistol toward Luke again to finish it. Victoria raised the revolver. This time her hands did not shake at all. She fired once. Morgan dropped where he stood. For 1 second nobody moved. Then the remaining men broke. They dropped their guns and ran for the far stable, vanishing into the trees without one backward glance. Victoria was already in the snow beside Luke. "Luke, Luke, stay with me." His coat was bloodied at the side, but when she rolled him slightly, she found the truth. The bullet had cut across his ribs, not gone clean through. Bad, but not death, not yet. His eyes opened just enough to find her face. "Told you," he whispered faintly. "Take it back." Then he passed out. The days that followed blurred together inside the Langley house. Victoria sent for the doctor. She dismissed every ranch hand still loyal to Morgan. She sat by Luke's bed through fever, pain, and long half-conscious nights while winter slowly loosened its grip outside. More than once she thought she might lose him. More than once he came back to her by nothing but stubbornness and the sound of her voice. When spring finally pushed green through the edges of the snow, Luke was strong enough to stand on the porch. Victoria joined him there. Below them the ranch stretched wide and golden under the first real sun they had seen in months. Fences needed mending. Barn roofs needed patching. Men needed hiring. Books needed sorting. It was a mountain of work. Luke looked out over all of it and then down at the saddlebag he had packed. Victoria saw it at once. "You're leaving." He did not answer quickly. "This is your place," he said at last, "not mine." She stepped closer. "You fought wolves for me, men with guns for me. You nearly died on my land for me." Luke looked away. "Still doesn't make it mine." "No," she said softly. "It makes it ours if you stay." That brought his eyes back to hers. The wind moved lightly through her hair. There was no fear left in her face now, only certainty. "You are home, Luke," she whispered, "and you are mine if you want to be." He dropped the saddlebag. That was his answer. Together they rebuilt the Langley ranch. Together they buried winter, fear, and the men who had tried to steal what was not theirs. Together they turned a place of betrayal back into a home. And when Luke Callahan rode beside Victoria across the spring grass months later, with the whole valley opening wide before them, he understood something he had never known in that lonely cabin on the ridge. He had saved a stranger in a blizzard. But the woman he carried out of the storm had ended up saving him too.